Welcome everyone to Mail Fuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone Season 5 Episode 12. It's called 90 Years Without Slumbering. So spoilers for the episode as always. This one's about an old man who is obsessed with maintaining this old grandfather clock. He lives with his granddaughter and her husband, and they are concerned that he's obsessed with this clock. He's working on it all hours of the night, and that maybe he needs some psychiatric help. He needs to see a therapist and maybe work out some issues. He's a sweet enough old man, but he is very preoccupied with the clock. He's got insomnia. He has to be reminded to eat because he's too busy trying to tinker. I think what this is doing right away, before they even mention it out loud, because eventually the episode gets very direct about talking about its themes, and the character's actively talking about what the clock means to the old man and all that. But right away, it kind of feels like the clock clearly is an extension of him. It's a representation of him. I couldn't help but think a little bit of Benjamin Button, which I don't like that movie very much. And I realised that I brought that up in a different episode recently because of the de-aging of the other episode. But funnily enough, another element of Benjamin Button is the idea that this clock, which in that movie goes backwards, but this clock is built, and it's when that clock starts ticking that the baby's born and so on. This kind of has the same thing where the old man believes that when this old grandfather clock dies, he will die. And it's a clock that has to be wound up every couple of days to keep it going. So he's obsessed with doing it. He's obsessed with maintaining it and making sure it's running at the right speed, because he'll see that as a failure upon him, and that maybe he's slowing down, that he's ready to die. So it's very straightforward in terms of like some of the human themes that it's going for, but I kind of liked the episode actually. I don't know if I was expecting to when I started it, but I think it was kind of sweet, and for the most part it just handled its character drama, its human drama, more than I was expecting it to. I think it has some nice human qualities to it. There's a little bit of a hokey thing towards the end, where he kind of speaks to his own spirit, which I was not expecting. That was kind of weird, but the other thing I wasn't expecting that was almost a twist, because this is a Twilight Zone episode, is that I was expecting him to die. I thought by the end of the episode, the clock, when it died, he was going to die at the same time, and everyone else was going to be like, oh my god, he died at the same time as the clock. What does that mean? Because you could imagine that ending. It feels like half of Twilight Zone end with that kind of tone, that kind of vibe. But they almost subverted it by having him actually live, and having it be him kind of finally let go of this obsession and let go of this belief that he would die along with the clock. And it's more like a resurrection. He actually says to his granddaughter at the end that he feels like he's been reborn, and now he's going to be there for her and her new baby. He's going to be a great grandfather. And I kind of read some of this as, you know, he talked a lot about his grandfather, right, when he was young, and that his grandfather lived to be 90. And it kind of felt like he was trying to cling on to the memories of his past through this clock. That he felt like he was old and obsolete, and he wasn't needed by the people around him, by his granddaughter. His grandson-in-law, I won't say he's a dick, but he's definitely very opinionated about the grandfather being around. He's being more stern about it. He's not being as sympathetic, and arguably maybe someone needs to be tough on him a little bit, because he has been a little obsessive. But by the end of the episode, it kind of feels like he's realizing that he can now be what his grandfather was for him to his new great-grandson. In fact, throughout the episode, one of the things that it kind of keeps doing is that it keeps reminding you that him and his granddaughter have a pretty strong relationship. They've got a strong bond. It feels like she deeply cares about him. She's constantly concerned and bringing him something to eat and making sure he's okay. It's kind of the heart of the episode in a lot of ways. And I think this idea that you've got this ticking time clock, pun very intended, because I think this is an intentional thing, is the idea that she's pregnant. She's not showing yet. She doesn't look pregnant in the episode, but they say she's pregnant and that this kid's on the way. this idea, this ticking clock is counting down to this new life, and it'll be, truly make him obsolete, because now he's not even just a grandfather anymore. Now he's another level removed from the current generation, if you will. And that's maybe partly why he's getting more obsessed with the clock at the start of this story, is because there's that extra big reminder of how much he's past his time now. But of course, the sweetness of the episode and the lesson of the episode by the end is that, no, he can be there for his granddaughter. He can be there for the baby. He can be this figure for both her and whoever the baby turns out to be, by being this older person in their life that they'll remember by the time they're his age. So there's a nice kind of sentiment to it. It's probably the perfect length. I think if this tried to be a full movie, I'd probably think it was beating the same drum a little bit too much. But as a 25-minute Twilight Zone episode, it's not the flashiest Twilight Zone episode. It's not an episode that makes you go, whoa, you won't believe the crazy thing they did here. It's just kind of a sweet story about life and sort of mortality, I guess, is the best way of putting it. And there's a couple of interesting sort of things, road bumps along the way. There's a scene before the ad break where he does go to the therapist that the grandsons insisted upon, and he keeps kind of dodging the questions about the clock, or not dodging questions about the clock. He's dodging questions about himself by talking about the clock, and then kind of keeps diverting the conversation with his, and it's very nice. It doesn't feel like he's trying to be a dick and not talk about himself. I think the performance here from Edwin, who plays the old man Sam, he is very likable throughout this episode. He has that aloofness sometimes that an old man might have, where he's maybe a little confused, or that time sometimes you're with an old person and they'll talk about something that they think's really important, and you just kind of have to nod and be like, yeah, sure, Jan. But this actually, he does come across that in a really nice way, where he's sort of adorable as he's obsessing about his clock, I guess, which it sounds a bit condescending to say that, but that is kind of how he comes across. He's very likable the whole time. The thing that I really enjoyed, though, was the main gist of the second half of the episode, before we get to the possible death, right, is that the neighbor who moves in next door, this young woman who's got a husband, buys the clock from him. He wants to get rid of it because the psychiatrist is saying, for your mental health, you have to get rid of this clock. The grandson agrees with that. And the old man, Sam, even has two men move the clock down into the main foyer of the house because he thinks, let's see how it looks there. And the grandson is like, no, we're not having this. The clock has to go. You're trying to make it more of a central thing in all of our lives, but we don't want it here. And your relationship with it is unhealthy. It has to go. So, sure enough, this neighbor who's over talking to the granddaughter mentions how much she likes the clock. And when he says that he's looking for a buyer, she says, hey, I'll take it. And he's like, oh, that's great. It's just next door. It means I can maintain it for you. I can come over and fix it. And I thought maybe it was going to go into a plot where he was bugging the neighbor a lot. Instead, it does this thing where some time skips ahead and he's going over to repair the clock or wind it for that next 48-hour period. And his granddaughter's like, oh, no, you can't go over this weekend. They're away on a trip. And he's like, but it has to be wound every 40 hours. And he's convinced that if it doesn't get wound, if it's allowed to stop ticking, that he will die. It's almost like it almost feels like a sort of precursor to a Nightmare on Elm Street style plot where, in that movie, the characters believe if they go to sleep, they'll die. This kind of feels like a kind of a play on that type of idea, where he believes if he doesn't wind his clock, he will die. So he's desperate to go over there. And sure enough, he ends up smashing a window trying to get into the neighbor's house, and the police pick him up. So, and it feels really sad. It feels, obviously they see he's an old man, so they don't necessarily get too stern with him, but they kind of like, okay, old man, here you come with us to the station. You're going to wake up the whole neighborhood. And they kind of treat him with this lack of urgency. Like, they never treat him like he's a threat. And maybe that even plays into the idea that he feels old and that he's not is valued or is important to the people around him anymore. There's even a great line when he's talking to the neighbor right before she says she wants the clock, where they're talking about the baby coming, and the neighbor kind of innocently, but also kind of in a presumptuous way says, "Oh, where's your grandfather going to live once the baby comes?" And he has this look on his face like, "What? You're going to get rid of me?" And the granddaughter's like, "No, he's going to stay here. Like, he's going to help us raise the baby. But there's this like just reinforcement from the neighbor, even though it wasn't an intentional thing, of like saying, "Hey, there's no room for you anymore. The next generation's coming. It's time for you to ship on out." So it plays upon those concerns that he probably has that are in his head throughout the entire story. And at the end of the episode, when he has his talk with a spirit and he says, "You know what? I don't believe in this stupid myth that my father and grandfather told me. Therefore, I don't believe that I'm dying." And, when he's talking to the granddaughter at the end of the episode, he says that, to be honest, that clock was on life support for 40 years. It took everything I had to keep it running. It kind of feels like he's talking about how he's been unfulfilled all this time, this past 40 years. He's not really accepted going into his older age. 40 years is a big time. He mentions that he's 76 at one point in this episode. So 40 years ago, he was 36, which is shockingly close to my age right now. That's quite a long time, but it kind of maybe feels like maybe since then he's been, I don't want to say on autopilot, but he's not lived as fulfilling a life as he should have maybe been doing in that time. And this idea of obsessing over the time he has left is representing by obsessing over the clock. And I think it's something that most people, as they're getting older, and hell, I'm even feeling it in my 30s, is you just start to kind of become more aware of how quickly time moves and how not long it's going to be until you're hitting certain milestones and how long it's going to be until you're a certain age. And you kind of just see this ticking time clock down to when you're going to probably die. And I think this episode very much gives us a character who has had that attitude for most of his adult life. And maybe finally at the end of the story here, he's able to sort of throw it away and enjoy whatever time he does have left with his family. So I thought it was kind of sweet. Like, I don't think, again, this is like the most exciting episode of Twilight Zone. And I do think the scene where he talks to his own spirit's a little hokey. I probably could have done without that moment. But yeah, I think it's a solid little story. And I would recommend this one. So that is 90 Years Without Slumbering. If we look ahead to next time on the Twilight Zone, we have an episode called Ring-a-Ding Girl. Rod, if I recall his little tease at the end, he talked about a plane and he talked about something from the occult. So I'm very intrigued, but let's read the description on IMDb and see what it gives us. Movie star Bunny Blake, good name, receives a ring from her hometown which is giving her warnings to come home while she flies across country. Okay. Yeah, I don't know what to expect from this, to be honest. I mean, it sounded like an interesting mix of buzzwords that he threw together at the end, so we'll see how it goes. But that is Ring-a-Ding Girl. We'll get to that next time. But let me know what you thought of 90 Years Without Slumbering in the comments. You can like to help out the channel. Hitting the like button does that quite a bit. More people will find us. And of course, if you want to go above and beyond, you can go over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and support us for as little as $3 a month. But thank you very much for joining. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.